I emphasize all the time the emotional aspect, the emotional and relational aspect for the students. The bottom line is, if the student is not doing emotionally well, nothing else matters, because the ability of the students to feel safe if during the classes room, that will be the most important factor for him or her to absorb information, to retain these informations, and also to apply this information, whatever educational he gets.
Welcome to the Digital School Dialogues podcast brought to you by the Digital School, where we explore the ever-evolving world of education and technology. My name is Waleed Al Ali, and with me in moderating this podcast is Professor Dede from Harvard Graduate School of Education. In today's episode, we delve into the crucial topic of students' well-being. This is a vital area of focus as it impacts not only academic performance, but also the overall development and the future success of students. Ensuring students' well-being involves addressing various aspects, including mental health, emotional stability, and social support, all of which are essential for creating conducive learning environment. We are privileged to have two esteemed guests with us today to help us unpack this important topic. Ms. Francisca Bessi, founder and CEO of Eventuras, an organization from Chile dedicated to creating inclusive educational experiences. Ms. Bessi brings a wealth of knowledge on how to support marginalized students and ensure their well-being in educational settings. Also, we have Dr. Issam Smeir, Lead Psychologist at Digitales Media, an expert in digital mental health interventions. Dr. Smeir will share insights on how digital environments can influence the students' well-being and the best practices for promoting mental health in these cases. Today's discussion will cover areas such as well-being for marginalized students, well-being in digital environment, also current trends and challenges, and of course, what are the future developments. So thank you both for joining us today. And before we dive into our discussion, could you please maybe take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners or whomever watching this episode?
So I'll just say a few words about Fransisca. She is one of our alumni from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She came to us with tremendous knowledge and experience, and we did our best to add some value to that. And since she graduated, she has been doing wonderful things in her home country, Chile. So Fransisca, tell us about your work.
Thank you for the introduction, Chris, and thank you also for the invitation. I have a short presentation to show you about our story in Chile, so I will share it. I'm going to start with the short story. This is me in 2018. I was finishing my master in education, and I was coming back to Chile with full of dreams about how I was going to help Chile revolutionizing education with a lot of innovative ideas.
Thank you, Francisca. Dr. Issam?
Yes. Well, that's a beautiful introduction. Thank you. My name is Issam Smeir. I am originally from Jordan, so I have interesting story. I actually graduated in Jordan from the dental school. So I was practicing dentistry for a few years, and then during the summer, I would close my clinic and go to the a youth camp in northern Jordan, and there I would listen to children and teenagers talking about their emotional, relational issues, family issues, and that's where my interest with psychology started. That's many years ago. So I decided to come to the United States. I switched my field into psychology, and I did my master's and doctorate here. And for the last 20 years, I've been working in the area of trauma among traumatized populations, such as refugees, displaced populations, and also with children. So I spend my time, I'm based in Chicago, but I spend probably 4 or 5 months a year in the Middle East and North Africa. The idea of the program that we developed, Amal for Children, to address emotional issues, and especially related to trauma, came a few years ago. I was leading for 5 years a project about building capacity among mental health professionals in the Middle East and North Africa in the area of trauma. So I spent 5 good years of my life working in introducing based evidence modalities that work with children and grown-ups in the Middle East. But I was a little bit frustrated with the pace of that, because after 5 years, I managed with my team to train maybe 100 mental health clinicians in Middle East and North Africa. So while the number is good, but then we have at this point an unprecedented level of trauma that we need more and more workers to do that. So then I was having a cup of coffee with a friend of mine on Digitales, and we were talking about how can we actually switch from this high specialized level of interventions where we train mental health clinicians to, in mental health, we call the second level interventions, that using school interventions, building this digital platforms where we actually can reach the masses, especially for the students who are we cannot reach in person. So that's the ideas of Amal for Children came and grew, and we've been working for 5 years to develop this series to address the trauma issues among students and specifically marginalized students in different areas in the Middle East and North Africa, and now we spreading it out to different areas such as in South America and other areas as well.
Well, this is exciting. What both of you have said is exciting. And Dr. Waleed, I know that the digital school at this point spans many countries, and perhaps there's different flavors of wellness challenges that students confront. But I wonder, as you listened, if you resonate to some of what was described in terms of what children are facing now.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dr. Issam and Fransisca, for the interesting introduction. I think we have a lot of insights we will have from today's, because we have from the Middle East and from South America. We have the direct, face-to-face interaction to address the challenge of well-being, especially within marginalized and underserved and trauma. But also we have how, for example, Dr. Issam used digital to scale. And I know this is a very interesting topic that Chris always loved to explore. For us at the digital school, from day one, we knew, because we are targeting to benefit marginalized and underserved communities in the region and beyond, that social and emotional learning is, or social and emotional aspect is a very important element, because in fact, you are dealing with children who've been through very difficult situations and scenarios. And because we need to really address that challenge, we've tried to, dive into it, but at the same time, we've been very, I would say, careful. I don't want to say scared, but careful, because it's a very critical domain and you need to do it right, not to tap into, difficult situation. So it is very important topic. We've been doing few things, but I believe we need to do much more. And I think the lessons learned from today's episode will be taken seriously around.
So for many years, I taught a course at Harvard on motivation and learning. And it described 4 different kinds of pillars of motivation. Engagement, which is something that people often use to mean the same as motivation, but it's just a subset of motivation. Self-regulation, which means can you control yourself well enough to take advantage of opportunities that are offered to you. Beliefs about yourself that perhaps you've internalized from other people or from society, as well as your own beliefs about yourself. And then dispositions that you've developed as ways of coping with life, behavioral patterns that you've developed. And as I interacted with many students over those years, it became clear that beliefs and dispositions, while they're not often discussed in terms of motivation compared to something like engagement, are just so important. And that children in particular are vulnerable to having beliefs inculcated that are not helpful to them. And also they often have limited life experience, so they don't have easy ways themselves of figuring this out. So I'm in social emotional skills, some of it I think is how do you play well with other people? But under that is how do you feel about yourself? And
Yeah.
I'm interested in both of your reactions to that kind of framework that I'm presenting.
Sure, I can start sharing something about that. The elements, I go to schools quite often because I work with traumatized children who have been experienced, lived in for a long time in toxic stress environment. It could be physical abuse, living in areas that are not safe. So when during these meetings, and I share this with the principals, with educators, I emphasize all the time the emotional aspect, the emotional and relational aspect for the students. The bottom line is, if the student is not doing emotionally well, nothing else matters. Because the ability of the students to feel safe if during the classes room, that will be the most important factor for him or her to absorb information, to retain these informations, and also to apply this information, whatever educational he gets or she gets at the school, in terms of in life experiences. So the emotional component is extremely important. It affects everything else, including academic and all of that. From a mental health perspective, and as a mental health clinicians, we typically clinically intervene. That's when therapy needed for a student, when their what we call their functional capacity, it's a big term, describe what do we expect from a student. So basically, for a student, for a child, we expect them to do, this is the most important roles in their life. One of them is to be able to go to school. The second thing, as you mentioned, Professor Kress here, is to be able to develop these relationships with peers. So if any of these two important roles in their lives get impacted somehow, it could be from trauma or from the narrative that you mentioned, people bullying maybe, or any other factors, including if we talk from the perspective of marginalized student, they can be other external forces such as discriminations and policies that target certain population. If they develop any of these narratives, they can affect these two important roles in their lives. And if these important roles are affected in their life, we become very nervous about their future, because we want them to do these two roles in their life: go to school and be able to develop relationship with peers. These are two extremely important roles in their lives.
What had I've seen in schools is something similar, and in the sense that if students don't believe in themselves or don't believe in their capacity to create a better future for them, why they're going to work hard. So usually in schools, or traditionally, they separate this academic part from the social emotional part, but they are so interrelated and one depends on the other. So and you usually see students there in marginalized schools, like, why I'm going to work hard? So what motivation I have to study or to really to fight for my future? And especially because, like, in their neighborhoods, usually, like, there is a common belief of that. So you have to go against, like, the community belief. So and also what I have seen, it's it has been impressive for me is the role of caring adults in doing this. So another thing that I have seen is that usually a lot of teachers, or some teachers, not a lot of, thinks, okay, I'm going to school just for teach students, and then and I don't have to be involved in their lives. I'm just going to teach the content, but it's not separated. And if you have a caring teacher, usually like it's like an explosion of positive things, not only because the kid is going to have better results, but also because the kid is going to have a better well-being. So yes.
Yeah, I will add to this also the importance of engaging the community. I mean, I did a few years ago, I had this good relationship with a teacher from the south side of Chicago, and it's a place where they have a lot of communities. They have an Arab American immigrants and refugees. So we talked about like me coming over to run these groups, promoting, again, it's kind of like a social emotional wellness and that kind of stuff. So we started meeting with the students, and the student actually liked it, and I was having a good time with all these meetings. And then the word came out to the community that there is a psychologist visiting the Arabic speaking students, and what's wrong with our kids, and they're not crazy. So and that's my mistakes of, and our mistakes, to how to approach these like issues with when it comes to emotional wellness, and to engage the community first, because there's a lot of stigma that comes with that as well. So engaging the community, I think, is extremely important. That's all kind of caregivers, tribal leaders sometimes, and all of that, to emphasize what the importance of that, normalizing the content of the materials that we present for them. And that can apply actually in all platforms. It could be either in person or even in digital format. So with Amal for children, we made important, like, because we run this program as in groups, we help like lay counselors to do that. So the first classes would be about normalization, that the student themselves get this message that there's nothing, I'm not losing my mind, I just experienced certain traumatic events in my life that sometimes force me to act in a certain way. And if anyone else passed through these experiences, they probably act the same way. This normalization, this piece, when you share it with caregivers, communities, it can be very relieving, and takes a lot of this social stigma, because our identity in many, I believe, Fransisca as well, that's applied to South America as well. Our identity, such as like in the Middle East and other community-oriented cultures, it's a group identity. It's important for us how do we look in front of other people, and that's, there's some differences here with the maybe Western or individual-oriented cultures.
Well, maybe if I step back on the inputs you mentioned, can we maybe define what do we mean by well-being and social emotional well-being, so our listeners can know what is it and what's not. So it's not someone who's sick and there is a psychiatrist coming to treat them. So if we can try to define it in a simple way, I think it will help to build on it, I would say. And then we can say within marginalized, it means.
In the case of social and emotional learning, I always teach it separating the social and the emotional part. The emotional part is the teaching of all related to emotions, like first identifying the emotions, like maybe putting a name to them, and also like learning the signs for a young kid, the signs of a specific emotion, for example, an uncomfortable emotion like anger. And then when you learn this, you have to, or you identify this, you can work for example, regulating it. Like you have, there are a lot of strategies to regulate, especially these uncomfortable emotions. It's not bad emotion, they are uncomfortable. and how to regulate this emotion, and also how to identify this emotion, this is empathy in others. How can see the signs that others are living a happy emotion or they are frustrated, etc. And in the social part, this is a very simple explanation. Maybe it's not so academic, but in the social part, you have all these related to others, friendship skills. In the case of a young kid, maybe give them also problem-solving skills, in the sense that maybe they want the same toy. What we're going to do? And so you give them solutions or strategies to solve that problem. But first they have to identify they have the problem. Okay, we want the toy. That is our problem. How we're going to solve this? How I'm going to be friendly to others, etc. This whole range of social strategies, how to relate with others and solve problems.
For me, I think as a mental health clinician, I was trained to look as wellness as in a negative way. And in the sense it's a lack of symptoms, lack of intense negative emotions such as sadness or anger. But this is, I think this is a very constructed view of wellness. As a better maybe definition for this, I'm a father of 4 boys, and in a lay language, the way I see my kids well, simply if they are healthy and happy. So and basically, so that I want them to be healthy, and so they can practice all the hobbies, the go to events that they like, practice their gifts, and happy in the sense of being well emotionally and socially well, to develop healthy relationship with their peers, with their communities, with nature. So wellness, I think, is more kind of like the wholeness. It's just in a student setting is sometimes we define the health, like the wellness for a student if they get like A grades, and that's very very constructed look into this, the wellness. For my boys, I want them to do well academically, emotionally, socially, relationally, spiritually. So it's the wholeness. It's the whole thing of being actually thriving, reaching their full potentials. That's what we look. So that's why I think initiatives like what you're doing here with the digital school and Fransisca is the importance of developing other aspects that might be missing from school settings, and to empower students to reach their full potentials. These are extremely important. And I would say add something to that is, we don't, like our kids, and that's applied to all of us, we learn physics, we learn math, we learn readings in schools, but nobody teaches about relationships. We need to figure out this this thing in our way, so that we end up actually learning by model. We observe the prime model relationship in our life, and that's the relationship between our father and mother. If this relationship was good and we were lucky enough, then we probably learn a few good things about relationship. If this relationship did not exist, or it was negative, or it was toxic, then we tend to like lost in the process. We don't come with a catalog. All human beings, we don't come to learn about ourselves. So this aspect, this social emotional aspect, and programs such as that address the emotional wellness are extremely important. I can't emphasize how this is important for the development of children.
And this may be naive, so please correct me if I'm off target, but I think there's at least 2 dimensions here. There's a dimension of trauma. You've experienced trauma in your life as a child, and that has led to uncomfortable behaviors and feelings, and you need to work through the normalization process as you've described, and to believe that you can transcend the trauma and have a good life despite the unfairness of what's happened to you. And that's kind of the wellness part. But there's another part the marginalization part. So in every country in the world, women are marginalized. Some ethnic groups are marginalized. Some cultures are marginalized. And even if you're well, you have a hill that you have to climb in terms of your vision for yourself being negotiated with the context that you're in, so that you're empowered to achieve that vision. And I'm curious as to what you think about that sort of two-pronged way of looking at the task that lies before us.
Well, I'm not expert in trauma. I know that social emotional skills can help you through trauma, but I'm not an expert in that. But my mission is to bring social emotional learning to all Chilean schools in vulnerable schools in a very systematic way, and I have done this. And this is my purpose, because these students have to overcome a lot of difficulties. And in that way, like, social emotional skills are critical. Usually, for example, if they go to university, or if they manage to get to university, usually what studies have shown is that these students fail usually in the first years, or sometimes they drop out because they couldn't overcome this the demanding studies they have to do. And in there, social emotional learning is critical, or their beliefs they can overcome this is critical. Usually because they don't have been taught in a very systematic way, social emotional learning is very difficult for them. And they don't have examples in their houses that tells them that they can do it. So they have to really learn by themselves and through mistakes, and they have to be very resilient, and sometimes it's very difficult. So if they have these skills, it's, as I said before, it's a superpower for them. Like, it's applicable to all contexts and to all different tasks in life. And so that's why I think and I believe it's, if I can give something to marginalized students in Chile, like, social emotional skills are one of the most important things that I can give them.
Yeah, and I'll add to this that the word marginalized literally means someone who's in the margin, right? So they actually away from the center where you get all the resources. And so there is two factors, as you mentioned here, Professor. One of them is the external factors. Some students, they don't have access because of policies, because of discriminations. It could be based on gender, it could be racism, it could be disability. So they cannot thrive. I mean, they have to put double the efforts in comparison to a different students to get the same results. So and a lot of people, they give up during this process. So here the issue is to how to fight these policies and make this access for the students and justice and equity and all of that. But then, in addition to this, there's people who are students. Since we're talking about students here, there's internal factors. There are internal factors within us sometimes that we choose to be on the margin. If we tell ourselves that we're not good, we tend to socially withdraw, right? Or sometimes we can go aggressive because we are angry, and that's why. And then we get suspended and pushed to the margin. So either way, we end up being on the margin and away from the access to get the resources that we need to advance in our life. And I'm talking about students here. So the question comes, since sometimes we cannot fight policies, we can be far away and all of this, if we can give an access to these students, and this is the benefits of these digital platforms that coming out. So I think of the Syrian refugee student I work with, who's 15 years old in Lebanon. He has to work in construction field to support his family. He likes to go to school, but he can't go to school because he has to work between like 8 till 3 o'clock the time in this, when people go to school in Lebanon. So if he can have this platform where he can get himself educated. This is an access. We are giving him an access to succeed. Because the only way, I think, in many ways, and I've worked with many countries, probably 28 populations, the only way for marginalized populations to get out of this cycle of poverty is through education. That's how you break the cycle. The problem is, how can we give access to these marginalized people to develop these skills and empower them with education so they can stand a chance to fight and thrive? So this is here, either way, I think, regardless if it is external forces, we need to give them an access. The internal one is when we come to the trauma, this is and that's how can we actually also help students to deal with traumatic events also in social formats and digital format platforms. So this is where they can address the issues that prevent them to, because trauma presents itself in certain symptoms that might interfere with students' ability to thrive. So, for example, one of the symptoms of trauma is avoidance. If you get traumatized by an animal, for example, you tend to avoid going to that animal, right? Even if it's a nice, like a dog or cat or something. So avoidance could be, like I work with students who don't want to go to school because their school got bombed, right? So if we work with them even in a digital, through these digital, what I'm trying to say is we having an opportunity now to reach out to people, even in terms of their internal struggles. So it's not only the external struggles where we give them an access, but also to change the narrative in their minds and tell them that, you know, you still can do it. And I, Fransisca was saying.
So Dr. Waleed, the digital school really does a lot of systemic thinking. You look at all the different ways that digital can help with learning and try to apply all of them, rather than just having sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. One of those is teacher education. All of us have mentioned the importance of teachers as caring adults. In the preparation that the digital school provides, is there a dimension that deals with the things that we're talking about?
Well, thank you, Chris. And it's a very important question because, you know, whenever we talk digital education, people automatically think, you know, of us as an initiative that distribute iPads or everything is online and a platform, and there is no need for teachers because everything is online. And for us, when we started to design what is the digital school and what is our pedagogical model and education model, we've decided that teachers are core element of the educational design that we are working, and we've invested heavily in the teachers development program in collaboration with Arizona State University. We took it in a phased approach, I would say. So first we developed two levels of training for teachers, and we said basic and digital, certified digital educators. And within that, there are certain aspects that address, I would say, in a very shallow or high level, this aspect of social and emotional. Then the next level, which is the specialization level, which is specialization in content curation, specialization in lesson preparation. This is where we are trying to build on our academy. You know, our teachers' academy is called Digital Educators Global Academy, and we believe with digital we can scale. And now we are adding a set of enrichment courses or development courses for educators to thrive in the digital environment. And this is where maybe the next step is really to focus on social and emotional learning. We were always trying to challenge how far you can go with social and emotional learning within digital means. And I know the thoughts here are, you know, either far right or far left. You can't do anything or you can do a lot of things. And maybe this is why this episode was so important for us, because at the initiation phase, first 2 to 3 years, we were trying to build what is digital school, what are the core elements. We've decided to take a holistic approach. So content, teachers, assessment, accreditation, Fortunately, we managed to achieve digital accreditation for the full accreditation for digital school from New England schools and colleges. And I think a big missing piece was, how we can drive social and emotional learning at students level in a structured way, and also at teachers level. And this maybe takes me to, the question maybe to Dr. Issam, to tell us about, their experience in scaling social and emotional learning with digitales. What is the story of digitales? How it provided services, the impact you created, so people know more about, what you can really do with digital.
So yeah, the story, as I mentioned, came around 5 years ago because we felt that we're sitting around drinking coffee and talking, something like our chat here. And we were thinking like we need to think in a different format here. We don't have enough mental health clinicians globally, but especially in developing countries. The mental health clinicians that we have, they are not trained into a lot of them on how to address trauma issues, which is we are living in an unprecedented level of mass trauma now with all the wars and natural disasters in our region and also in other regions in the world. So we were thinking about just, Dr. Waleed, to what you talked about is we need teachers. We need coaches. We need religious leaders. We can't do this thing alone. Now, there are certain percentage of students or in the population who are severely traumatized that they require specialized mental health clinicians. There's no question about that. But there are also big portion, the majority of students on all of these countries, they have experienced some level of trauma, but not extreme that we cannot approach them in different formats. So we were thinking of this untraditional interventions where we can give those lay counselors, those caregivers who need to have some level of insight and some level of training, but not to send them to to study psychology for 12 years. So because we can't wait for that time. So we needed to build it like this kind of platforms or formats of digitals that can reach students in their own places and use infrastructure that already exists. So for me to establish a group, bringing 6, 7 children or 12 children, it will take drivers, it takes arrangement with all the parents and all of that. But we have this luxury of having them actually in school. So if we can use students, teachers, and give them the materials that they need in a very interesting format, such as animations, we can teach them, the students, a lot of skills that they need, that they can help them to manage this level of trauma. And the benefits, not only emotionally, it's also academically. So the students that stakeholders, educators, principals, we can present them with a benefit. Some of them will be like, well, how about the education? Well, having a emotionally well students will probably most of the time lead to better grades. So the digital schemes, and we have a modality that we introduced in the Middle East. It's called narrative exposure therapy. It's evidence-based. It's very culturally appropriate because it tells stories. There are other modalities that are really good. However, they need a lot of adjustment to them. For example, just to mention something, because I think this is important also, we need to develop culturally appropriate curriculums. Sometimes we try to get something Western and try to force it to fit. So take for example, the CBT, cognitive behavioral modality. We use a lot of emotions and verbs and words that do not even exist in Arabic. So that, for example, the emotion angry, and Dr. Waleed, you know that. We have only one verb basically in the Arab world that we can use, غضبان. In English, there's 25 words for angry. You can be irritated, you can be upset, you can be frustrated, you can be overwhelmed, you can be angry, you can be mad, you can be crazy. To teach this to children can be really frustrating, and to teach them to say, I am very angry, or I'm very, 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 very angry, to measure the intensity can drive people crazy. So most Arabs, for example, they would say, I am, I feel like a ticking bomb. That's a story format. And we have one of the refugees here in the United States, he got arrested for saying that. So because he used this story format. So we need modalities that are actually also culturally appropriate to use in our, so we need a curriculum that's actually look like the children culturally and lingual and value-wise and all of that. So we built this format, this story format, where a student can look to animation series and see themselves in the story. Not and see the schools, the teachers, the curriculum there, the way they talk, they playing soccer, they having a relationship with the grocery store there. And we introduce all these elements, therapeutic elements that help the children to deal with this trauma level in a very entertaining way. And at the end of these animations, we give this curriculum to the teachers where he can just show that animation to the students and then do some exercises with them. And everything is scripted. And we test these animations with a group of students to see, because as you said, like sometimes you don't want to, you want to be careful, especially when it comes to trauma and mental disorders, health disorders, and that kind of thing. So we worked in everything. We worked on the colors to make it not triggering. We worked on the language. We did not share, like we said in the stories that Saleem, the main character, experienced trauma, but we don't get into details of the trauma. So we went through all of these details. It took like 5 years of research to end up with this product that we think is extremely helpful and entertaining as well, because you also need something that's entertaining for the kids. You need to you're competing now with TikTok and YouTubes and rappers and all of that. You don't want materials that's also boring for children that they're gonna just give up on it the first minute. So there is a way to move forward. We have an opportunity. I think we just need to be creative and also utilize the existing community centers, schools, religious centers, all of that to promote this social emotional healing among our students.
Fransisca, I saw in the images that you showed puppets. Can you talk a little about the puppets? I know that they're physical, but it seems to me that they're related to this idea of some kind of animation, whether it's digital or not digital.
Yes, it's true. At first, I was very curious about the puppets when I saw them. But then I realized, as Issam was saying, that the format, it's very important, and for school it's the same. And even for teachers, a lesson to be fun and entertaining is very important. But especially for little kids, puppets are a very important, useful way to show or to show a story, because kids are that age have a lot of imagination and they really believe the puppet is a real student. So they interact with the student as a friend, and sometimes they tell things to the puppet that they wouldn't tell like the teacher. So it's very fun, and it's a way of telling a story too, or to interact and to tell the other student, I'm living the same as you, as in a puppet way, and we can practice a way to overcome this difficulty. So it's a very fun way, but I think it's also comes in the way why these programs are evidence-based. Like they use all these strategies, these formats, the lessons are very easy to implement, and in that way, they are easy to implement in a lot of different schools and in different contexts, because they have thought also in the teacher, and in order that it's easy for the teacher to learn and to implement. And for me, that has been critical. And if the teachers see that for the student is fun, they get really excited too. So in this journey, I have learned that the format is not only the content to be systematic, it's also the format.
I've seen, Issam, an evolution of children's programming in the United States over the decades. And when Sesame Street started, when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the public broadcasting system started, it was all cognitive. It was about reading, it was about math, early literacy, which is great. I mean, those are very important skills. But it's interesting to me to see the evolution of that programming towards the kinds of things that we're thinking about. Yeah. How does a child handle a death of somebody that they care about? That was actually the topic of a Sesame Street episode when one of the characters passed away.
Yeah.
I think what's great about DigiTales is that you didn't sort of repurpose something. You began with the core being about wellness and social emotional. And Fransisca, similarly, you began with the core being wellness and social emotional. And I think the lessons that you're learning and the evidence that you're collecting can inform not only initiatives like the digital school, but it can inform a lot of the children's programming at scale that we see across the world that does well with the cognitive, but maybe could grow in terms of how well it handles wellness, particularly, again, for marginalized groups.
Yeah, I think the growth has to do with the need. There is, I mean, everybody, the stakeholders, all of that, educators, schools, communities, parents, they know that this is an important topic, and none of us has been trained on this. Like I even if I want to talk to my children about certain topics, this could be something that I actually struggle with it myself, right? Like death or wars or unnatural events happening in our life. So I need to go and find answers. And I think these materials presented to children in a very light format, such as, what Fransisca is doing with puppets, or we need to go into their world, not the other way around. So I can't talk to my kids who's 10 years old, having, these sitting with him over the table, talking all these kind of like big terminology. I need to use story formats. I need to watch something with them. I need to play a game. And we know that also with teenagers. I work with teenagers, and when I do some work with them, I don't see them in my office, because that's the most important thing for a teenager. We go for a walk. We play sometimes basketball. And then during this is like, it's the side-by-side kind of conversation rather than that face-to-face, right? So, and now we're dealing with also a lot of trends. Like if you see, I have my kids bring a lot of their friends here to my house in the basement. They sit down, all of them, and you get like 20 kids, they're sitting in the same room, but they're texting each other. It's mind-boggling. So, all this, I mean, this digital, like we need to be, it is important for us also to be educated of how these trendy things happen. They use all these abbreviations. I have no clue what they're saying. They don't like, and then also like abbreviations and texting. They don't use, none of my kids have voicemail, for example. I have to text them. If I leave a message, they did not even set up the phone for voicemail. So we're living in a different time, different generations, even their mindsets. And there are a lot of studies on these things. They actually, how the new generation absorb information. A lot of it's in the digital format. The normal way, that classical, traditional ways, they even don't work now with them. I don't know what's your experience, Fransisca, with that, but.
No, I don't have more to add. I really agree with you. I was laughing about the
texting.
Us and teenagers.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we ask in these episodes is basically on behalf of the audience. So people will be watching this, and they may be saying to themselves, wow, I would like to do more with social emotional learning in my context. And each of the three of you has different interventions that you're using that are evidence-based. So could each of you maybe just provide some advice? If someone's watching this episode they want to implement better social emotional learning in their context, what advice would you have for them?
I think my lesson through all these 5 years is that for me, my purpose it was social emotional learning has to be as important as a math class and a language class. I have to help Chile to implement it in a systematic way. And in that journey, I discovered that the teacher is really, really important. And you have to think in all the things that are affecting the teacher. The teacher usually doesn't have time for anything. And usually the teacher is also very, very tired. So you really have to think in the teacher, because if you think in the teacher, you are entering in the system. And if you help the teacher, you are helping the student. So giving them easy to use resources, engaging, help them in the process, hear them, listen to them, training them, but in a very fun way too, because they are tired. You really have to get to them, and they're usually like are burned out. So if you get in a very different and sweet way to the teachers, usually they start to listen and to change. They really, social emotional learning connects with their vocation of why they studied education in the first place. They all most of them want to improve children well-being. So that would be my advice, to really take care about the teachers.
I would say for teachers who are or educators who are listening to us is that it's important for them to understand, to study their students. So education need to be, the social and emotional element need to be integrated in the educational system. So even if you are a math teachers or science teachers, or you can have like 3 or 4 minutes to talk about something important in your life or in your class life, and learn these like life lessons, right? So I have a mentor for many years here in the States who will always tell me this sentence, and I remember it always. He said, when I was going through my PhD and all of this, he would say, don't let your classes interfere with your educations. So education is more important than classes. It's the life lessons. You remember, if any of you remember teachers, do you remember them more of the things that they do sometimes maybe outside the class than inside the class? I don't remember what the math teacher taught me in terms of physics, like, you know, all these equations, but I remember them being kind to me or saying good word or that kind of thing. So studying your students, I think, is extremely important. So so if you can integrate that, it'll be helpful. So for example, if you're a teacher working with refugees, or you need to see everything through a trauma lens, right? So that when the students act in a socially withdrawn manner, he might not be shy. He might be just having avoidance symptoms. Or if he's acting aggressively toward other peers, he's not a bad kid. He just have this kind of like overwhelming emotion within him or her that's, you know, lead him to act in a certain way. So and understand your audience. I think that's extremely important. That would be my advice for them.
Well, I think if I would add to that, I think I really want to reinforce what you mentioned about the importance of social and emotional learning and the well-being, and the hype of all the discussions about future jobs, future skills, how to prepare them for the future, AI and the trends. I think social and emotional learning should be at the top of these priorities. And in parallel to that, of course, within marginalized communities, you have different perspectives to that challenge. But I think with digital, I try to use the analogy whenever I say, we try to enhance access to education through digital means wherever possible. And the question will be, it's not like physical education. I say, yes, I know, but I don't have the luxury of physical education. Allow me to give them 10, 20, 30, 50% through digital means, because I don't have the other luxury. I would think the same applies to social and emotional learning. So if we can provide some of the learning or the awareness on social and emotional learning using digital means, definitely we should build on that, either at teachers level, which is, very important, or at students level. So these are my, I would say, reflections.
I would add quickly to that also, there is also pros to the digital platforms, especially when it comes to the mental health wellness, because there is still, I mean, things are changing now in the Middle East and South America to a therapy and seeking help and all of that, but still it comes with a stigma. So this is these platforms that teletherapy and other format can be actually helpful in the sense that it provide this privacy and anonymity, you seeking help without people knowing. And these are like in developing countries, the small countries, people know everyone, right? So if you go to a building with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the whole town would be like, oh, I saw Issam's visiting a psychologist. So people try to avoid these things. So this is, I mean, there is also some pros to the to the digital aspect of when it comes to the platforms with the social emotional wellness.
The pilot was Chris.
I know that we're short on time. I just wanted to say how much I admire what all of you are doing. I think it's very, very important work. And the first task of any educational system is to give people hope and to empower them. And I'm excited about what we've talked about today because I think we're making progress on both of those.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dr. Issam, and thank you, Fransisca, for the great discussions we have. I can't believe how 1 hour just flied away. I think there is a lot of insights from this. We will follow up the discussions definitely, and we'll try to share in the description of the episode the links to further information so we can keep this dialogue running. I'm sure there should be more episodes about well-being and social emotional learning, so we reflect and learn more. And with that, thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank
talking
you.
to you.